Dawnbringer Book 2, Chapter 2, Doubts and Suspicions. Rollane walks through the streets of Ristfand alone and passes through a high archway of stone into the southwestern section of the city, where the barracks and training grounds of the militia are located. So much has happened already in the short time since he and Eldarion arrived in the city, and he finds the turn of events almost difficult to believe. How could he have known that his plan to speak with the Heros, the Jarl of the clan of Rovus, would lead instead to him being an eyewitness to the murder of the Imperial Councillor and the skirmish that led to the supplanting of the Empire's troops within the city? He thinks back on these events now, while he simultaneously looks forward to speaking with Eldarion about them. But for now, he has no time to reflect upon these things, and instead is forced to draw himself back into the present, to the matters at hand. A city needs to be fortified. Ordinary citizens need to be trained into soldiers, and soldiers need to be equipped with arms and armor. Rollane, of course, is little qualified either to train men or to equip them, but he finds people turning to him for his aid and guidance. He is unsettled by this, by the fact that he has come to be seen as possessing a kind of authority simply because of his role as the news bringer. If anyone is fit to aid the people of Ristfand against the coming assault by the combined forces of the Empire and the Druadach, that man is Eldarion. But it appears that the gods are marking out a different path, one unexpected by both of them, and Rollane struggles to come to grips with it. He has seen a great leader in Eldarion almost from the beginning, and he has wished to follow him, to aid him in guiding the people of Telmerion in whatever role may be marked out for him toward freedom and peace. But now Eldarion goes where he cannot follow. He walks a path into darkness and suffering, invisible and yet real, which Rollane simply does not grasp, and from which he feels excluded. And Eldarion rests in pain, he slumbers in incapacity, while the city continues to live, while the men continue to prepare for battle, and while the forces of darkness prepare to march upon them. Yes, Rollane has spoken often with Sirion, a true leader, though of a different sort, but there are certain questions troubling him about which he wishes Eldarion's perspective and even simply the solidity of his presence. Has he truly come to depend so deeply upon this man in the short time that they have been together? It has been less than 3 months since they met. A small period by all accounts, even if most of that time was spent continually in one another's company and walking together through fears, trials, and hopes. But shall Eldarion ever be who he once was? Or has his life forever been changed by those mysterious events that occurred during the few hours they were apart, hours in which Eldarion saved life at the cost of his own, and in which Rollane witnessed the unveiling of the true nature of the Heros and the unfolding of events which would forever change the future of Ristfand.
"Sir Farael?"
says a voice, interrupting Rollane from his thoughts. He realizes then that, despite his efforts, he has still been thinking about the past and worrying about the future, rather than attending to the present.
"I am not a sir,"
he replies, turning his attention to the man who approaches him along the road.
"But what is it that you wish?"
"Captain Sedan wanted me to ask you whether you wish to be fitted for some armor."
the man says.
He said the choice of kind is yours to make. You may have whatever you request within reason, of course.
That is a generous offer.
Rawlane says.
But are there not many men in need of armor, and many who are forced to wear ill-fitting protection, made for another man or no protection at all?
The smiths try to remedy that as we speak.
The man rejoins.
But the captain told me that he rather insists that you accept this offer.
Then if I have no choice, I will go. Tell him that I accept. Where shall I be fitted?
I shall lead you there now, if you please.
There is one thing I wish to attend to first.
Rawlane says.
Could you tell me instead where to go? I shall find my way there myself.
Very well, then.
Do you think that this will be enough for your family today?
Rawlane asks as Aldin, an ordinary labourer from the ghetto now, by necessity become a soldier, receives the covered basket from his hands and lifts the cloth to inspect its contents. A loaf of bread, some handfuls of nuts, a few thick slices of salted pork, and some apples.
Yes, yes.
Aldin says with enthusiasm in his voice.
It is more than we are used to. I cannot thank you enough for doing this for us.
It is really thanks to El Marie and Syrian.
Rawlane replies.
The food is from the temple, and it is only due to their permission and efforts that I am able to bring it to you.
But you are the one who approached them about our need.
Aye, that is true.
Rawlane acquiesces.
But you chose not to hide it from me.
I am glad that I did not.
Tomorrow I will bring you some more.
Are you sure?
Aldin asks.
I can come to the temple myself and pick it up.
I insist, at least for the present.
Says Rawlane.
You are in training exercises almost all day, and I want you to retain what little time you can spare to be with those whom you love. Great danger approaches, and we do not know what fate awaits us. I wish not to take you from your family any more than you already have been.
You have my thanks,
says Alden, and placing the basket under his arm, he turns away. After this, Rawlane makes his way to the forge to which the captain's messenger had directed him. A burly blacksmith, face dripping with sweat, is hammering a sheet of metal into a sword and looks up as Rawlane enters. The smithy is little more than a covered platform of stone without walls, the roof held by pillars with a furnace, anvil, and grindstone. The heat of the forge is intense, and the air is thick.
I was told to come to you for a fitting,
Rawlane says.
Hi,
replies the smith.
my name's Frail. It's nice to meet you. I'll be supposing that you are Rawlane Frail.
I am.
Very good. Give me 1 minute and I'll be with you.
Rawlane steps back away from the heat to wait, watching the smith works in silence, and Frail chuckles softly at this. When he has finished whatever particular task he thought necessary to accomplish before letting the metal cool, Frail calls to Rawlane.
You won't learn much watching from a distance.
I don't know if I would be able to learn much just from watching anyway.
He replies.
You would be surprised.
In truth?
Yes and no.
Frail says.
You could learn to beat and grind a metal pole into a point sharp enough to pierce a shirt of mail, maybe even plate, or take it and make it look more or less like a sword. But any work of true skill, you'd need to be taught or to experiment till your arms fall off. Though if you did that, I suppose you wouldn't be making no weapons at all, nor wielding them.
Then I shall leave the smithing to those who possess the skill.
Rawlane says.
For my arms shall be needed yet, like the arms of all the men of Ristfand.
And I shall provide you all with what arms and armour I can. And when the dread day comes, I shall also fight by your side.
We need valiant and strong men like you, Frail.
Rawlane says, placing a hand on his shoulder.
We have yet to see how valiant I am,
He retorts.
though I do have the strength of 2 men. That must count for something.
Let us hope that it does.
says Rawlane.
Now, how about the fitting?
Come inside with me and we'll get your size.
Farah says, gesturing to a door at the back of the smithy that leads into a building.
What kind of armor will you be wanting?
I have worn little armor in the past, so nothing that shall be too much of an adjustment. I want to be able to move freely.
Armor won't stop you from moving freely. I can design it so that it can move as your body can move. However, it is the weight that will be the adjustment. It takes a while for a man to become accustomed to walking around in 30, 40, 50 pounds of metal.
Let us aim more for the 30 mark then, or even less.
Virya leads Rawlane inside what he sees to be the entryway of his house, then pulls a knotted cord from a table and begins to take his measurements.
What weapons do you favour?
He asks as he wraps the cord around Rawlane's chest.
Until now, the bow and the axe.
A big, hefty battle axe?
A war axe small enough to fit into my belt comfortably and to be wielded with a single hand.
Then you might want a shield to go with it, or at least a buckler.
Firer says.
Axes aren't the best weapons for blocking and parrying. And if you have an army charging toward you, I can almost assure you that you'll want something more solid between yourself and them than an axe.
Have you fought before?
Asks Rawlane.
You speak as if you know.
It seems common sense to me when you think about it. But I've got just the thing.
Firer finishes the measuring and then disappears for a moment into an adjacent room. When he emerges, he holds in his hand a small circular convex shield made of treated wood plated with iron. Rather than a handle, it has two adjustable leather straps, enarms, one for the forearm and one for the hand. It is 2 feet in diameter.
This is the biggest target you're going to get before it becomes a shield. Here, strap it to your left arm and see how it fits.
As Rawlane does so, Firer disappears again, and this time reappears with a long thrusting dagger in a sheath. This too he gives to Rawlane.
The dirk can be held in your left hand as well as the Taj, blade downward. It will give you a great deal more options in combat than just fighting with an axe or even with axe and shield.
Are you sure these will not be better suited for another warrior?
Rawlane asks hesitantly.
Oh no, I insist.
Firer responds.
They are yours. But now let's talk about armour itself.
After some conversation and a few experimental try-ons, they decide on boiled leather armour, not as protective as metal but much lighter, a brigandine for the torso, pauldrons for the shoulders and upper arms, and vambraces for the forearms. Virya already has such armour and only needs to adjust it so that it conforms more precisely to Rawlane's proportions. This is something that Rawlane himself thinks important, since he does not wish to take any more time than necessary away from the making of arms and armour for the other men. That evening, Rawlane sees Eldarion in the dining hall as he walks past. He is seated in a corner of the room, alone. The temple members take their evening meal alone in their rooms, as a rule, and during this time the dining hall is used only by guests. An empty plate sits before him, and he rests his head against his hands, his elbows against the table.
Welcome back to the realm of the living, my friend,
he says, crouching down beside him and placing a hand on his shoulder.
It is good to be back.
Eldarion replies, embracing him in response and then looking intently into Rawlane's eyes, as if to judge how he is faring.
I suppose, however, that it is a good thing that I asked to speak with the Heras alone and sent you on your way.
Rawlane says,
Who would have foreseen that it would have led to what it did? The fire in the ghetto started at the very time we were on our way to the palace.
I hoped to speak with you about those matters soon,
says Eldarion.
There is much that we need to discuss,
agrees Rawlane.
When would you like to speak?
I am still feeling quite weak, and I intend to return to my room in just a moment to rest. How about first thing in the morning tomorrow? Do you have the time?
Yes, I do.
He replies.
There are a few things for which I am required later in the day, but most of the morning should be free.
Thank you,
Says Eldarion.
I shall look forward to speaking to you then.
The next day, Rawlane rises early and, feeling restless, paces the corridors slowly and silently, not so much preoccupied in thought as preoccupied in emotion. He passes the door to the library, finds it open, and steps inside simply out of curiosity. The walls are lined with books and scrolls, and many shelves create a mazework of aisles in the small but overcrowded room. Rawlane has never been much given to reading, but he scans the titles of the books now and pauses to take a few down and flip through their pages. A certain book he recognizes from when he was younger, one of the few books that his family owned and which he read and reread over a course of many years. Taking it in his hands again, he sees that the cover and the binding are different, but the text and the format are almost identical to the copy that he knew. He then sits in a padded chair by the wall, near a lamp that burns bright and strong, and begins to read. The events of history surrounding the occupation of our country by the Valyrian Empire are now shrouded in mystery and forgetfulness. Much has been forgotten, as if effaced in the blowing snows of time, buried deep under rifts or eroded beyond the point of recognition. And yet, certain things have been impressed so deeply upon the memory of our race that even if their specifics are no longer known, their shape remains. We know of warfare and blood. We know that when the Empire came to our shores, they brought the sword, and a sword mightier than our own. But we also know that for centuries before this, our land itself was marked by strife, by contention for supremacy, by the conflict of clan against clan and heroes against heroes. A question poses itself to us, even at the distance of nearly 2 centuries. Did the Empire bring war with them when they came, or did they intend to bring peace? And our own people insisted upon war. We may never know the answer to this question, for it is almost as if such matters were deliberately erased, forgotten, by those who participated in the great events of that time. All that we know is that even if the Empire's coming was followed with combat and bloodshed, the ultimate fruit of its presence was peace. The occupation of the Empire brought about a peace between the clans, which, until that moment, had eluded us in all but the rarest of circumstances. Rawlane lowers the book and looks out the window through which morning light shines yellow and bright. The song of birds filters in from outside, a song of peace and lightness and carefree wonder, and yet Rawlane struggles to hear it, to rest in it. The peace that the land of Telmerion has known in the past 200 years is fast fading, and he feels a threat of violence drawing near from many sources, a threat that he feels powerless to stop or even to delay. Shall their beloved home soon become a land drenched in blood, spreading from the point of utmost concentration, the rebellion around Minstead, to bathe the entire land in loss and pain and grief?
How are you feeling?
Rawlane asks, as he sits opposite Eldarion in the latter's room.
Much better now. Of course, I've only been awake a couple days, and before that I wasn't even conscious. At least that is in the ordinary sense of the word. It is hard to explain, and I can't put it to words even to myself. I am afraid that I would utterly fail to communicate it to you. Even if I tried, I hope you understand.
Is there anything that you think I should know about all of this?
Asks Rawlane.
Someone explained to you what happened, correct?
Yes. Elmarie herself tried to explain to me this thing that she called bearing. I did not really follow, so I asked Syrian about it. His words were a bit clearer, at least for me, but
But it doesn't seem normal.
offers Eldarion.
Almost frightening.
no, it's not frightening. After all, it's just you, and just, I don't know, healing someone. How could that be frightening?
Says Rawlane, not entirely honestly.
I suppose not.
Sighs Eldarion, lowering his eyes. There is a dense moment of silence before Rawlane says,
But do not worry about me. It will just take some time, I think, to adjust.
Yes, for both of us.
says Eldarion, and then he looks back up with kindness in his eyes.
But tell me,
He begins, changing the subject.
what happened in the Hera's palace?
There is a lot to tell, actually,
Rawlane answers, glad to let the prior subject rest for the present.
and it concerns not only the Hera's palace. I assume that the others haven't told you much.
They haven't told me anything, in fact. They seem to wish that I hear it from you and from no one else.
I wonder why.
Rawlane murmurs.
I think they are trying to protect me.
Eldarion says,
Protect you? From what?
I am not sure exactly. I think they see me differently now after what happened.
That is understandable.
Rawlane comments, hiding the fact that he too is struggling with seeing Eldarion differently. It is not that he is a different person than he had known before, and certainly not that Rawlane looks up to him more now or feels more comfortable with him. For Rawlane, at least, it is quite the opposite. He feels put off by what he sees as Eldarion's aloofness, an aloofness, granted, that is not due to his own choice, but to the very nature and fact of his suffering. When he tries to explain it to himself, all that he is able to say is that he feels distant from Eldarion, or more precisely, he feels that Eldarion has moved away into a distance that Rawlane cannot reach, as if he took the only boat to a distant shore. And now all that Rawlane can do is look across the waters and see his figure silhouetted in the mist. Because of this, Rawlane simply does not know how to relate to Eldarion anymore, how to be close to him as they were close before these events transpired. In the midst of such thoughts, he realizes that he is sitting silently with his gaze on the floor, absent-mindedly thinking, while Eldarion is looking at him with inviting eyes, waiting for him to continue. He realizes, too, that they have turned right back to the previous subject without even intending it. Shall it always be like this now, from this time forward?
Sorry. There is just a great deal on my mind.
Rawlane says.
The city is astir with preparations for the coming attack, but something preoccupies me in the midst of it all. I do not trust our leader. Granted, to all appearances, he has now shown himself to be unconditionally on the side of the rebellion, but considering what we have learned of his character, I doubt the authenticity of his actions. Or rather, I doubt the integrity of his heart.
Maybe if you told me what you witnessed,
Says Eldarion.
that might help me to understand what you mean to say.
Of course.
He pauses, trying to choose his words carefully and to speak clearly of what he saw.
When I entered the Radra Castria, I stepped into the midst of a heated argument between the Heras and the Imperial Councillor. The Heras was accusing the Councillor of setting fire to the ghetto in order to root out the last remnants of the rebellion. But the Councillor said that he would never act without the command, or at least the approval of the legate in Brughill, and that, regarding such an act, he had received neither. In response, the Heras said that he had long known that the Councillor acted beyond and against the directives of the Empire, and that no longer could such treachery be tolerated. He continued to press his point until the Councillor became enraged. The latter drew his blade and threatened the Heras with severe punishment for these false accusations. In response, he too drew his blade, and just in time to deflect an attack from the Councillor, who seemed to have lost his self-restraint. At this moment, a fight broke out in the chamber between the guards of Ristfand and those of the Empire. In the midst of the fray, the Councillor was slain, as were most of those men who with him served the Empire. A few were taken captive, for reasons, I suspect, of bringing witness to bear on what they beheld that day. To all appearances, it seems that the hearers acted solely in self-defense, standing up against a bloodthirsty councillor who acted far beyond the commands of his superiors, and who proved this by attempting to slay the very man to whom he was meant to offer counsel in the name of the empire. The actions of the hearers and his guards, thus, were nothing but an appropriate response to those who first drew the blade against them, thus breaking the bond of peace. It seems to me, though, that this whole affair was a tactic planned by Heras Glendus. He has since taken undivided control of the city and claims leadership of the clan of Rovas in the absence of the councillor and any other imperial representatives. We have yet to receive any response either from the capital or from any of the imperial forces in nearby lands. I fear that their response shall be one with the coming attack, all the more vigorous for the bold moves the Heras has taken to exert his rule, whatever reasons he may claim to be on his side.
But if he is sided with the rebellion and fighting for the freedom of the people of Telmerion,
Eldarion says,
then surely his actions are fitting to such a goal and even militarily tactful. If he is indeed a leader of the rebellion, we could not well expect him to act differently than he has done. What then, precisely, causes you to distrust him?
It is because I judge his accusation toward the imperial councillor to be false.
Rorlane replies.
I do not believe that the councillor started the fire.
You believe that it was an accident that the Heras then utilized for his own purposes?
No.
What then?
I spoke with many men who worked in close proximity to the councillor, and all unanimously told me of his honor and integrity. Yes, he stood entirely for the goals and ideals of the empire, but he was not a duplicitous man. He would never act against or beyond the directives of his superiors, nor, indeed, would he willingly cause the death of innocent persons.
If that is the case, then he is unlike many of those who bear a similar office to his own within the empire. But perhaps, like myself, he did indeed receive such a command, and simply did not communicate it to the Heras. For what reason would such a plan be shared with the very person who would have cause to prevent it? The councillor could very likely have received an order to set fire to the ghetto, and even if he was a man of integrity, resisting such an explicit order is a very difficult thing to do. Is that not more feasible than the fire being an accident? It seemed much too widespread to be an accident, that I witnessed firsthand.
Regardless of what kind of man he was, or what course of action he took, he lives no more,
says Rorlane.
Then why not let it rest?
Eldarion asks.
Because I think it possible that the Heras himself commanded the fire.
Really, why would he do that?
I thought I already made that clear. Now the Heras has a perfect pretext to justify the death of the councillor and his forces.
Rorlane explains.
It is a matter of simple self-defense, defense of his safety and the safety of his people.
But why would he need a pretext at all?
Eldarion asks.
I'm not following your train of thought. Could you explain more thoroughly?
I think it due to the fact that he wishes to assert his claim before the judgment seat of the empire, to assert himself as the sole ruler of the clan lands of Rovas. But he does not want to make that claim with the burden of having led a rebellion against the empire on his shoulders. That is, at least for the empire to see. He wishes, rather, to present himself as a peaceful and moderate ruler who did everything in his power to cooperate with the empire and only acted in defense when the councillor went on a tirade of destruction. He wants to appear as though he cooperated with the empire in quelling the rebellion. That is, until the councillor went too far and burned an entire section of the city and then sought to slay the man who pointed out his wrong. What happened after this, he would say, was unavoidable.
So you are saying that the Heras himself started the fire in the ghetto as a way of framing the councillor?
Asks Eldarion.
I do not believe either way,
Rorlane replies.
though I fear it. Such an action seems entirely in accord with his character, and if the Empire did not command the fire, then the Heras does have just cause before the Empire, for then they can only assume that the councillor did indeed act independently and without the blessing of the legate.
If even a part of what you say is true,
says Eldarion,
then Heras Glendus Medora wages a war of his own, or seeks to profit from the civil war in whatever way he can. and he little considers the cost that such actions bring to bear upon his citizens.
Precisely.
But false accusation is a grave matter,
Eldarion warns.
as is the silent judgment of the heart, even if not voiced. The former can be severely punished, and the latter also bears with it its own poison.
It is not that I intend to publicly accuse him,
Says Rawlane quietly.
though perhaps that is the appropriate course of action. But I have no proof of wrongdoing, and I don't know where I would find any. I rather am simply concerned about what he may do, particularly if he is placed in a position in which it falls upon him to protect his people at the risk of his own well-being or rule.
You fear that he will choose rather to sacrifice the people for his own power?
That is my fear.
But does he have the authority to do such a thing?
Eldarion asks.
If my suspicions are correct, then he had enough authority to command his subjects to burn a section of the city and all the people within it.
But if your suspicions are not correct,
I don't know.
Rawlane sighs.
it seems all that we can do is stand strong in defense of the people, whatever may come. I think what we ought to fear and what we must resist is the clear and pronounced enemy, and not allow ourselves to be preoccupied with fearing enemies in our midst.
You tend to trust people too much and too easily, Eldarion.
Says Rawlane.
I hope, for your sake and for the sake of us all, that it does not redound unto harm.
I am not counseling you on what you yourself are to do.
Replies Eldarion.
We will not know how the Heras will act in open confrontation with the Empire until it comes to it. Then, and only then, will he be judged, and not on speculations, but by his own actions and their fruits.
Rawlane opens his mouth to reply, but after a moment's hesitation, closes it again.
What is it?
Eldarion asks him.
It is nothing. I still need to tell you about what happened after the slaying of the councillor. As I told you, I was circumstantially present at the most opportune moment. Whether fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know. After things settled and the dust cleared, as it were, which took the greater part of the day, I approached Glenders and spoke in this manner. I bring pressing news concerning the civil war. And granted you do not yet know of what I shall speak, my words may mark out a course that shall allow you to prevent great evil and suffering for your people, and to retain the authority that is yours. He replied to me as follows. How is it that you came at such a moment claiming to bring a message concerning the civil war? Can you not see that the civil war is on our own soil? This very day my hand was forced in defense of our own people, and in the process, the man who represented the Empire, but was no more than a tyrant, has fallen. It was then that I realized that he did not know of my presence earlier that day. My witness to the murder of the councillor had itself gone unnoticed. I did not think it fit or necessary to tell him otherwise. I simply replied, I see that you have stood up against the imperial power over your own people, and you are very likely right to do so. I come to you because I have learned, through quite unusual circumstances, that I shall soon elucidate the plans of the Empire to lay siege to the city, and they plan to do so in collaboration with powers of unearthly darkness, called by men the Druidach. His face betrayed doubt and confusion, and this turned quickly to anger. At first, he did not believe me. It took a thorough recounting of what we beheld in the barrow of Serra Galaptes and my responses to a rather pressing interrogation for him to begin to accept my account. In this interrogation, he demanded to know a great deal concerning my past, and I was only barely able to conceal the fact of your identity. He did, however, learn of my previous alignment with the rebels, though he well hid his reaction to this. He truly does walk the line of a neutral observer in the civil war. In this seems to lie his security and his strength, but I think he has other plans and finds himself in a rather unusual situation. Shall I tell you what I think?
Go ahead.
Eldarion replies with a nod.
I believe,
Rawlane continues,
that he does not know whom to trust. Though the reasons are opaque to me, I have my guesses. It seems that he finds himself quite alone in governing Ristfand and the lands of Rovas.
What do you mean in saying that he finds himself alone?
asks Eldarion.
Did he not recently succeed in defending against the imperial attack against the rebels, and now has put an end to the counselor himself?
I think the feat is smaller than in words it appears to be.
replies Rawlane.
After biding his time and making preparations, it seems that Glenders seized this opportunity to exert his authority at last and to claim all the lands of Rovus as his own. But that is not really feasible in his current situation, even were he to slay every person favourable to the Empire within 50 leagues. For not only does the Empire have a presence in almost every settlement on the continent of Telmerion, however small, but surely the forces west of the mountains shall retaliate and seek to take back what he claimed. That is one of the reasons I mentioned to you earlier that I think the fire was staged by the Heros. He needed to be able to stand before the Empire as a reasonable man, as someone with whom to dialogue and reach an agreement, not as a rebel to be cut down.
And your message destroyed that plan of his in a single blow.
Eldarion concludes.
Is that what you are saying?
The Empire marches upon his domain whether he tries to avoid it or not. As much as he may aim to present himself as a partner in dialogue, the armies come to attack his city nonetheless.
But if he is a leader of the rebellion, what else could he possibly expect? Or is he not a leader of the rebellion but actually neutral as he claims to be?
A good question,
replies Rawlane.
He clearly presents himself not as a leader of the rebellion, but as one who would force all the rebels to acquiesce and to return to peace. He counts on that as the currency with which to barter himself and his rule with the Empire. Only when he felt backed into a corner, either he must risk the exposure of his true intentions or he must allow the rebellion to die in his lands, did he follow through with the plan that I have just recounted to you. And he did what he could to justify his own position, to make it appear as reasonable self-defense, as if somehow he could still fight for the rebellion in secret while standing before the Empire, as an ally.
I am struggling to follow you now, Rawlane.
Eldarion says softly.
I am sorry, but my mind is just not capable of making sense of these things at the moment. But I don't think it much matters what methods the Heros uses to protect himself while still trying to fight for the ideals that he wishes achieved for his clan. When the day of battle comes, he shall either stand with his people against the combined might of the Empire and the powers of darkness, or he shall betray them in manner small or great. I still think little is to be gained by these questions and suppositions, though you seem to be putting a great deal of effort and attention into trying to unravel them.
Forgive me, Eldarion,
says Rawlane.
but you did not witness what I witnessed. Something concerns me greatly, and I have tried to express that something to you as best I can. Yet it seems that you do not share my concern. I shall therefore take it and bear it alone. If I am meant to act upon this in any way, all I can do is trust that a path shall be made clear before me.
I wish that I could help you, Rawlane.
Eldarion says quietly, with a mixture of compassion and strained tension in his voice.
I truly do, and I am trying to bear the pain of the realities of which you speak. But I simply do not follow you in your preoccupation with affairs beyond your understanding and your influence.
You speak of bearing, my friend.
Rawlane says, frustration showing in his voice, which he immediately tries to conceal. But his final words come out with a strong tenor of accusation within them.
You speak of bearing, and yet I feel like you keep your distance from me when I try to invite you into this space. I wish for your advice, your counsel, and yet you simply dismiss my concerns as excessive, as beyond me. Well, if I don't act on them, who shall?
Rawlane.
Sighs Eldarion, reaching forward to place a hand on his friend's knee, but Rawlane rises quickly to his feet.
I'm sorry that I spoke with you,
he says.
This is something that I must do on my own. I suppose that is the way that it must be.
And with this he turns and leaves the room.